enough? Do we need other resources to come in? Enough hazmat equipment that we can look for things like asbestos and contamination, those sorts of things. The emergency medical care part, we're not designed to be what is called a disaster medical assistance team, a DMAT. Our job is not to set up a bunch of tents and provide medical care for folks in the area who now don't have medical care because the hospital has collapsed or the doctor's offices have burned down or whatever the circumstances are. That's a different team altogether. Our job is to provide medical care for our team. That's the primary mission. But we may be in a circumstance where we rescue somebody and there's nobody to hand them off to. There is no EMS system there to hand them off to, or the hospital is damaged, or it's going to be 12 hours until we can arrange evac for those patients, whatever. So we do need to be able to provide care for a small number of patients, the victims we pull out, until there's somebody to hand them off to. And these are approximate numbers of roughly how many people we're supposed to be able to take care of in a sort of a longer term basis. But again, providing for our own team is really the priority here. This is a really good way to get injured. The injury rates in these missions are actually fairly high, nothing terribly serious, but our job is to keep our guys healthy so the team can continue to function. And because of the fact that you may not be able to rely on the local medical resources because they may be overwhelmed by the circumstances, say in Christchurch, for example, I don't know much in the way of details, but I'm guaranteeing the emergency departments were filled and we can't be asking them for support. So we need to be able to provide all of the medical care for our own team ourselves and not be going to them and saying, hey, one of my guys got a laceration, I need some suture material and some lignocaine and whatever else I need. We've got to be able to do that all ourselves. So we can kind of break this into the things that we do to get the team ready for a deployment, the things that we do on site, and then the mop-up stuff that we do afterward. So we have to enforce some health and fitness standards so that the folks are ready to deploy. The physicians on the team have the authority to prevent anybody from deploying. If you show up for a deployment and you've got the flu, I'm not taking you with me. I don't need you to contaminate the rest of the team or you to have some kind of sinus pressure problems at altitude when we're flying, etc. So I have the ability to nix you from the team. We also do a lot of screening. These guys, we only see them a few times a year when we train, so I've got to keep checking any new medical conditions, new medications you're on, things I need to know about. Simple stuff like making sure your immunizations are up to date. Hopefully your home fire department or wherever is doing that, but I've got to keep records on those things as well. Making sure that the medical cache is ready to go is probably the hardest part of this sort of before the deployment work that we do. Because even the normal saline or Hartmann's that's in the kit is going to expire probably before I get a chance to use it. All the medications are going to expire. I can't just keep controlled substances like morphine at the airport. So we've got to have some sort of MOU with a local hospital. It's easy in Harrisburg. There's a hospital fairly close to that air base that's willing to do our medical cache maintenance for us. So they rotate the equipment out. One of our paramedics is responsible for taking the medical piece of the cache to the hospital every 4 months, 3 times a year. And they rotate all the medications out back into the hospital stock and replace them with new stuff. And if there's an actual deployment, somebody's got to go to the hospital and get all the controlled substances because we can't keep those at the air base. So we have a whole process and procedure in place for picking up the morphine and the benzodiazepines and whatever else we're going to take with us. And that takes a fair amount of work and manpower. And then finally, the next most important piece that we're doing is drills. We tend to drill a lot more than we deploy. Most of those 28 teams have never actually done a deployment until 9/11. If you don't count 9/11, where essentially every team in the country deployed, most of these teams have not done one on that scale or on a big scale. They'll do local, smaller types of events. But we do a lot more training than we do deploying. So that's our chance to get to know the members of the team, most of whom are not people we work with on a day-to-day basis, and learn what their skills, limitations are, etc. So even starting with something as simple as medical check-in, making sure at the beginning of the drill that everybody's got all their medical paperwork completed. We do a full set of vital signs, make sure everyone's fit to perform that day. And building the medical aspect into training, making sure that the rescue guys know, I realize you just got a new rescue tool that you can't wait to go play with, but how are we going to integrate that into the medical piece of this? Once you've used that tool to rescue somebody, let's work on the medical aspects as well, making sure that that's not forgotten. So we do a lot of training in things like this confined space simulator. This is at the Indiana County Fire Department, which is maybe 40 kilometers outside of Pittsburgh. The only downside of this is you'll notice that all the sewer piping that we use for the simulator is black, which is really nice until you train in the middle of July, which is summer for us. I realize it's winter here, but it's summer back home. And most of our drills we try to do in warmer weather just so we're not uncomfortable, and a day spent in here can be pretty nasty. So what we'll do is we'll put a mannequin victim, say, over here. Here's the entry point here. You can see they've got a triangular lowering device rigged, so you got to get down into there, work your way through, find the victim, stabilize them, get them out. That's about a 3-hour process. I know it only looks like, maybe 100 meters or so, but it takes quite a while to do this, and spending 3 hours in this in the middle of July, not quite what I had in mind. Okay, so as soon as you get the deployment, you can actually start gathering information right away. And this is kind of similar to what the paramedics will do on a day-to-day basis when you look at your little MDT and see what the call is. And you start thinking about, okay, 87-year-old fell down the stairs. You'll start thinking about what the injuries might be. Why do you think this person fell in the first place? You're already starting the process of some medical intelligence gathering, even just, it's just part of your background, what your brain is thinking about as you go to the call. So same basic process. What kind of building was it? When they had the bombing in Oklahoma City in 1995, everybody in the fire department knew that there's a large daycare center in that federal building where a lot of the federal workers drop their kids off on the way to work in the morning. So they all knew, without anybody having to tell them, oh geez, it's the Murrah building, there's going to be a lot of kids involved because there's that daycare center on the second floor. That kind of medical intelligence gathering, if you're going to somebody else's event, if you can start gathering some of this information ahead of time, even before you've left your own base, while you're still getting check-in and getting ready to go, you can learn a fair amount about the types of circumstances you're getting into. What's the weather like there? Are you going to a different climate that's warmer or colder than you're used to, etc. What kind of building construction do we need to worry about? And most importantly, from my perspective as the doc on the team, what are the medical resources like in the area? Are they intact? Because it was an event like Oklahoma City where none of the hospitals were damaged. A couple fire stations had some minor damage. But essentially the EMS system and the hospitals in Oklahoma City were all completely functional. So that's a whole different circumstance than if you're going to Haiti, for example, where there's no hospitals left, there's no ambulances, you're completely on your own for medical care. And getting that information early is going to make it easier to plan how you're going to do this.
Do you have a systematic way of gathering that information? So
Yeah, we have a whole set of forms. I don't know how it is here, but the USA runs on forms. It's amazing the amount of paperwork that's involved with these urban search and rescue task forces. The logistics guys have entire crates that are full of laptops that are preloaded with all this stuff, and we have printers and everything. And we can download, upload stuff, but you're printing out a lot of forms and just filling out a lot of things by hand. So at the medical check-in process, we'll start working on the forms as soon as we can start getting information. We've got a whole big template. I can probably dig the forms off and send them to you if anybody's interested in seeing them. It's probably even on the FEMA website. This is all, none of this is like double secret information here.
And you have briefs, I'm assuming.
Exactly. Yeah, we do a brief. When we're on scene, we do a full medical brief at least once a shift, every 12 hours. When you change shift, the off-going guys, the oncoming guys will meet not just medical, but the whole task force. So you'll get the logistics leader, the rescue leader, the hazmat leader. Everybody will come together and start sharing information about what's happened in the last 12 hours. And if you're doing what we call a blitz, when you first get to the scene, forget the 12 hours on, 12 hours off. Everybody's going to be working probably for the first 2 days. We'll do those about every 6 hours to share the information. And that's all templated on forms that you have to fill out and make sure you got all the info that you need. Okay, you get to the site, you start setting up the gear. From our perspective as the medical team, setting up the medical area and letting everybody know where it is important, because it's not hard to get hurt while you're just doing the setup process, and everybody needs to know where the medical issues are. As soon as you start working on the site, and let's assume for the moment that we're talking about something like Oklahoma City where there's a defined site and not Haiti where it's the entire country. Setting up a forward medical area as close as is reasonably safe to the actual area, and again, letting everybody know where it is. We have one of those little orange flags like kids put on the back of their bicycles, and we put one of those up, and that way everybody knows where to go for medical help if they get injured while they're working, etc. And what we usually will do is we'll designate one person from our team, usually one of the paramedics, to be the interface to the local EMS system. Who's the EMS incident commander for this event? And what information can we share about what resources are available? If I pull a patient out of the rubble, do some stabilization, is there somebody I can hand them off to? Is there going to be an ambulance sitting somewhere, and where is it, and how's it going to get out of the scene? How congested is the area? What are our plans for getting that done? I cannot send one of my team with that person to the hospital, for example. I got to keep everybody with me. I only got 6 people total, and I can't be, reducing my numbers by sending people off. I need to keep them with the task force. So what are the arrangements going to be for transporting patients to the hospital? Maybe we have to do it by air, not because of the distance, but because there's so much congestion, so many vehicles, that if an ambulance comes in to get a patient, they can't get back out of the area just for traffic reasons. You got to think of these things ahead of time. This is the UCLA Olive View Hospital in Sylmar, California. I want to say 1978, 79. Earthquake. Nobody was badly injured in the hospital. It just sort of slumped down. It didn't actually like fall over. But unfortunately, their ambulance bay was under the building, and all the ambulances were parked under the building. So here's an ambulance that's now reduced to about 2/3 of its original height. So that's not going to be providing you a whole lot in the way of resources while you're working the scene. So are the hospitals usable? The hospital may look okay. Northridge earthquake in Northern California, I don't know, mid-late 80s sometime. The hospitals looked fine, but the engineers went in and there were huge cracks running down a lot of the stairwells and some of the exterior walls. So they didn't want to use those hospitals. You know, any aftershock could come down. So you got to get people out of those hospitals, redistribute them. So you need to have this information as early as you can so you know what you're going to do with your patients. Can I get additional equipment? If I start chewing up my equipment, is there a way to get it restocked, or am I really on my own? Is there other gear that people can bring me? Something as simple as oxygen. We don't carry a ton of oxygen. You can't carry, you know, super big cylinders of oxygen on an airplane. It's like carrying, you know, scuba tanks. You just can't do it for pressure reasons. So oxygen is a particular problem. Is there a way I can get some oxygen once my smaller supply runs out? Do I have restocking options, or am I really on my own? And then there's a bunch of sort of public health issues that you really don't think about until you're there. We've had a few circumstances in the U.S., mostly DMATs, not urban search and rescue teams, where the whole team is wiped out with gastroenteritis because something in the food, somebody, a well-meaning person brought some food to them and said, here, you have something to eat. And the whole team went down with gastroenteritis, not very useful. At the New York City deployment, Scott Weir, who was working with me in New Haven and was on the Massachusetts team, became known as the food Nazi because he actually carried with him one of those meat thermometers, and he would go around checking that all the food had been heated to the right temperature and all before he let the guys eat it, strictly enforcing hand washing. They were apparently not very happy with him, but nobody on the team got sick. So some of these roles that you don't really think of as an EMS physician kind of standard job. It's not really something that I'm thinking about on a day-to-day basis, but can be very important. Same thing with water. What's your water supply? We take enough water with us for basic, eating, drinking, cooking type stuff for that first 96 hours. We don't have enough with us for showers and whatnot. But if you've got a water supply, how reliable and how safe is it? You don't tend to think of those things on a daily basis in the emergency department function in EMS, but it's very important. Media relations, if there's medical issues involved, you can bet that the incident commander is going to come to one of the docs or one of the medics and say, I need you to go talk to the news guys from the TV or whatever about the medical circumstances because they don't feel qualified to talk about it. Again, not something we do on a day-to-day basis. So we need to have a little bit of savvy in that. We all go through, at least back home, veterinary care, the basics of, what do I do if one of the dogs lacerates a paw? Sewing up a dog paw is totally different from sewing up a person. I mean, the skin is extremely different. Where to put an IV in to rehydrate a dog. Luckily, they have huge veins, so it's not a big issue, but you got to know where they are and how to get to them. So the basics of veterinary care, I usually take 4 dogs on a deployment, so if 2 of them are down, I'm down to half capability. And then there's the unending paperwork, like we talked about, just ridiculous amounts of paperwork involved. After all this is done, after a deployment, just like the case when you're working the street as a paramedic, anytime there's an injury, the paperwork you have to fill out, the follow-up processes you have to go through to get that all taken care of. Reconstituting the cache for the next time. I've been tempted to say that once you come back from a big deployment, you're not going to have to go out again anytime soon. They're going to give you plenty of time to get your life back together, remember who your family is, go back to your regular job, reconstitute the cache. But I gave a similar talk to this about 3 weeks ago up at ambulance, and one of the medics who's on the New South Wales team came to me and said, they actually sent us back out again another deployment about 10 days after the last one, so I can't say that anymore. In general, though, like post 9/11, we didn't bother putting the cache back together for about a month. That was an ugly deployment. Our team, again, I wasn't there. I was back in New Haven, but our team was there pulling body parts out from under the World Trade Center for 2 weeks. And we let people get back to their lives and remember who their kids were and all for a solid 6 weeks before we got a big meeting together, spent a whole day at the base, cleaned everything up, reconstituted the cache. Whoops, not sure where that sound button came from. And kind of got ourselves ready for the next deployment. And that's probably fairly typical. And then again, the